back to mixing. So the goal here, we're going to concentrate on the drums for a bit, and you all have been kind of starting your statics on those big projects and what next. So going back to Bodhisattva, we have our song. We did a static mix. We set up some folder tracks. Concentrating on the drums, I am using a routing folder, so I can just listen to individual drums. I can listen to the whole group. Okay, so getting right into it. The ultimate goal is to be able to do a lot of this stuff without having to solo tracks, but as an introduction, we're going to have to do that. And we do, we always do solo tracks. So listening to the kick drum. Right away, the kick hasn't even hit for a while. So we have a lot of bleed. So first thing I want to do is actually get into EQing this thing a bit. Using the TDR Nova, we can turn on, so remember we don't see anything in the graphic or in the dynamic interface unless we turn on the the analyzer. So we have the input, which shows us what's coming in to the EQ, and then ultimately, if we choose output, it shows us what's in, but then it also shows like what we have done to the sound. So we're going to take a look at the output. And what's interesting already is that bleed is up in this area when the kick hits. So that tells us something about where the majority of the frequencies of the kick lay or lie. I'm not sure. So I am going to grab my low frequency, and I want to go a little bit lower than that peak because I want to get a little bit more low end. So I'm going to aim roughly maybe 60. And I'm okay with a fairly wide Q because I want some of that body. I want to bring back some more of that beater, and the beater tends to be, in the higher frequency range. So I'm going to drag this over to about 1500, 1600. I'm going to adjust the Q on this one because I don't want as many surrounding frequencies. I really want to try and get that beater. And there's a trick that a lot of people are going to look down upon, but I think as beginners, it can cause a crutch, but I think it's also a really helpful thing, which is to kind of give yourself a fairly narrow Q, a very narrow Q, and then boost this thing up and go looking for where that beater seems to really hit. I think it's somewhere maybe around there. So about 1750, 1800. Widen this out just a little bit. And then I think I want to cut a little bit of this kind of more muddy range, boxy range of 500-ish. All right, let's see if we bypass it, what it sounds like. Maybe we should get to the kick drum. Let's come to this section. That's a lot more. So I would say that we've given it a lot more oomph, a lot more body. Did kind of cut out like a certain cardboard boxiness, gave it some attack on the kick. I mean, on the beater. And possibly, if we really wanted to, we could theoretically put in, I don't tend to do this though, put in a low pass filter just to clean up, make sure that nothing that's kind of up there gets through. Now again, why would we use a filter on any of this stuff? Just because there might be some sound coming up there that's not integral to the instrument, and as multiple tracks with unwanted frequencies slipping through compile on top of one another, you start to get some noise that adds to or takes away from the clarity of your track. All right, so the overall mix. So I think I'm happy. Let's listen to that in context. Okay. Now, the snare drum, I'm just going to walk through kind of some things I've already done. EQ wise, if we listen to just that top snare top, so I wanted to, look at this, looking at the input, that there is some stuff coming through here, and I really don't think that below 100 is that integral to the snare drum sound. So I put in a low cut filter or high pass filter. Now, I actually can hear it a bit, but it may be something that's somewhat subtle. But what we're trying to do is just eliminate any, let's call it a hum, anything that's just not integral, important to the snare drum sound. What I did want to do is I came over here to about 369 with a medium Q, and I wanted to boost in order to kind of get a little bit more beef to the sound. It's a really thin snare drum. I cut about 1,100, cut it by 1.7, and then I did want to kind of bring up an overall sizzle above 3,000. So 3,000 is kind of a sweet spot for human hearing. A lot of kind of what's going to really cut through is around that area. So for guitars, things of that nature. So I don't want to, it's not, an overwhelming amount, but I just wanted to brighten up the overall snare. So in an interesting way, we're doing two things here. We're beefing and brightening to give it a better overall sound, I think. Okay. Last one, I'll show the snare bottom, which in and of itself is a fairly thin. So I didn't do a whole lot on this one. I just wanted to kind of bring up, find a little beef in it because it is so thin. Now it is supposed to be that way because we're going to add that to the overall snare. But I wanted to bring up about 520, which normally I often cut in a snare drum because that is kind of where the boxiness lives. In fact, I'm going to change it. So I went down a little bit to about 428 and raised it by 5.2. I still kind of want to accentuate a little bit of that, the snare, the actual springs. So we're getting a little bit more oomph out of it. And then with the actual snare, So it gives a nice overall tone to it. Okay, so that's kind of our EQ for the kick and the snare. We'll stop there for the moment.